All right, everyone. I think we'll get started. Welcome to our panel, Funding the Future, Strategies for Advancing AI in Education. We have a terrific panel for you today. For those of you who aren't familiar with philanthropy, it is another really important source of funding for new projects and initiatives and programs that allow people like us in academia and nonprofits and so forth to be able to create the kinds of innovative programs and offerings that we do. So again, just a really important source of resources to enable our work, particularly innovative work that we're talking about here today at the intersection of AI and education. So I'm going to start by just introducing the members of the panel. We have Amber Oliver here. She is the Managing Director of the Robin Hood Learning and Technology Fund. This is a collaboration between Robin Hood, Overdeck Family Foundation, and the Siegel Family Endowment, which aims to transform learning for low-income students with technology, particularly in the New York City area. Amber also has held positions as the COO of GripTape, the VP of Global Laurea, UNICEF, and the United Nations Secretariat, and the World Bank. All right, welcome, Amber. Woo. We also have here Bo Thomsen, who is the head of Education Impact at Leiboh Education. He is a renowned global leader in education, social impact, and environmental design. His work focuses on integrating technology into education, healthcare, and urban development, aiming to redefine lifelong learning and solve complex challenges. He has held significant positions, including the Vice President and Chair of Learning Through Play at the Leiboh Foundation, and has led impactful initiatives in over 30 countries. Welcome, Bo. All right. We also have John Sotsky. He is the Strategic Impact and Learning Director at Overdeck Family Foundation. At the foundation, John oversees impact measurement, research, learning, and data for the Action Grants portfolio. He brings over a decade of experience in advancing social impact through data-driven and business-minded approaches. John previously was the Director of Strategy and Assessment at the Knight Foundation, where he guided strategy, research, and evaluation across its funding for journalism, civic innovation, and the arts. Welcome, John. Woo. We all have Louis Leiboh. He is Deputy Director of the K-12 Education at the Gates Foundation. He leads the K-12 Education Research and Development Team to support innovations in technology and math learning. Louis has had educational technology teams and programs combining experience as an engineer, a startup entrepreneur, and a middle school math teacher. Previously, Louis worked at Google, leading the partnerships and business development with top educational technology partners globally. He also headed up the Teach for America's national team focusing on educational technology and data systems initiatives. Awesome. Welcome, Louis. And Daniel Lai is Program Director of Cool Think at the Hong Kong Jockey Club. He has established a lasting legacy on Hong Kong's digital landscape over 5 decades. He has spent time working in the IT sector. He has held key IT managerial positions with the Hong Kong Jockey Club. He served as head of IT at the MTR Corporation and as the Hong Kong government's Chief Information Officer. He is currently a research team member of PolyU's Department of Computing, developing a model and platform using AI and big data to predict learning and behavioral outcomes for students to address student diversity. Great, welcome, Daniel. All right, so this is a very high-powered panel. I just wanted to start with an opening questions for all of our panelists to speak to, which is, what are your current funding priorities at the intersection of AI and education? And if you're not making active investments, what are you most excited to see getting funded in the future, given what you're learning here today? We'll start with Amber.
Well, thank you so much, and so happy to be here with all of you. It's been a great few days. We've done so much learning. So the Robin Hood Foundation is a foundation that funds only in New York City, the 5 boroughs of New York City, but we do reach 1 million students and 1,800 schools. So while it's one place, it's pretty big. And the Learning and Technology Fund, as an extension of Robin Hood, thinks about the ways in which we can invest in education as really a mechanism for moving families sustainably and measurably out of poverty. So we're thinking about economic mobility at scale. And learning in tech has two main areas of focus. One is the ways in which we can integrate computational thinking into the K-5 curriculum, which very much influenced by the work that came out of MIT. And the second area is how we can improve how students read and write by bringing together high-quality curriculum with personalized learning practices. So for us, when generative AI hit the world in November 2022, we were so excited because we saw it as a real mechanism by which we could accelerate both those strategies. It makes it possible for kids to do more creative and constructive thinking, but it also holds the promise for differentiation and personalization in ways that we hadn't seen prior. The way we've been investing in it thus far is primarily through capacity building, making sure that the institutions that are supporting all these students, as well as governments and the nonprofits, are able to figure out what it is they want to do with AI and then support the schools to do it. So we haven't actually been investing in directly in AI literacy because our wondering is if there's a step before that that would be helpful as we get to democratizing AI literacy for everyone.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and so Lego Foundation is a corporate foundation. We own 25% of the Lego company, share the same values and mission as the Lego company and the Lego brand. But focused on supporting children's development and learning through play to equip children to be creative and engaged lifelong learners. So our outcomes are holistic. It's creativity and critical thinking alongside traditional learning outcomes. I think as a background in terms of what we are focusing on right now, the 10, 12 years I've been with the foundation, we've shifted from a philanthropy, which is more like traditional addressing funds for urgent needs with communities, towards a program-driven foundation. Programs like identify key subjects or themes like early childhood or redefining learning for education or teachers, towards a system-level funder trying to address challenges across ecosystems like changing assessments or catalyzing conversations. And now we're actually towards our fourth strategy, which is trying to be more community-oriented, more listening, working with the community, understanding what the needs are and address these issues, and capacity building. So we just discussed here before the session. So the recent things we've done, for instance, is funding research fellows in the US government through an independent organization called Federation of American Scientists. So really trying to build capacity in the government to speak to AI and technology, because a lot of decisions are made without having that competence. Secondly, funding tech and technology and play in developing world communities, so making connections between the expertise that exists in institutions like MIT and in this environment and local countries to develop their own technologies and approaches to that. And then capacity building among educators. So you may have seen Playful Learning initiative in Denmark, for instance. So we're looking at pre-service. How can educators be more familiar with materials and technologies, and how can it be connected with the environment? And then a research strand has been going through all our work for the past 40 years. So we are proud supporter of the many research institutions, in particular the long legacy here with MIT Media Lab. I think there's a very strong, discussion to have around values and technology and AI right now, which is something that we absolutely pay a lot of attention to in our work.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It really is a pleasure to be here with all of you for these past few days. I work at the Overdeck Family Foundation, where our mission is to provide all children with opportunities to unlock their potential. And I look around this room, and just hearing what I've heard over the last few days, I just see so much potential in this room, so it's just really inspiring. We are a national foundation, and we work both inside and outside the classroom to provide students with measurable enhancing opportunities. We work across several different portfolios, including early childhood, out-of-school STEM experiences, teacher professional learning, as well as student-centered learning. And we are a foundation that cares a lot about evidence. We invest in research and validations to help pilot or innovate new models and to scale those models. When it comes to AI, we've probably made around, well, we're doing a little analysis before this event here, and so far we put it at about $12 million of investments across 15 different investments we've made in either new AI tools or research for AI. All told, we have about 25 different grantees that are integrating AI into their models to advance student and teacher outcomes. And that includes things like AI tutoring and Khan Academy and Khan Migo is a grant, and we have a few other tutoring interventions that we support. That includes things like teacher coaching and AI tools for teacher practice and effectiveness. And that includes things like AI for different student-facing interventions like Quill, a writing application. So we're spanning the gamut of different interventions, seeking to find ways of both testing new AI interventions as well as building evidence about their effectiveness.
All right, thanks. Good morning, I'm Louis from the Gates Foundation, and also really excited to be here. Thanks for having me. The Gates Foundation has invested in education for quite a long time, but a couple years ago, our team, I'm part of the US K-12 education team, made a decision to focus entirely on math education. And the reason for that is just the importance of, especially if you look at the stats around passing algebra by 8th or 9th grade, and what a huge predictor that is of graduating high school and future success beyond. We all know math's important. Students and parents, a lot of the research shows that they think math's the subject most in need of updating in the US, and I'm guessing I might be preaching to the choir when you think about how important math is when it comes to AI and technology generally. So we're doing a range of work in math, often supporting innovative math curriculum and supporting teachers to make sure they have the professional development and supports they need. And I'll just say there's so many ways that AI can be useful. It's quite a personal topic to me. For me, I feel super lucky. I was math and technology were the things I was most excited about when I was a little kid, but I was super lucky. I had parents who recognized that and figured out ways to get me in advanced math classes when I was young. I had a high school teacher that taught me HyperCard when I was in high school. It's a little bit of a dated reference, generational reference. And was lucky enough to go to undergrad here at MIT and spend a ton of time at the Media Lab, where it continued to spark my curiosity and love for learning. And so when I was a middle school math teacher, which by the way was the hardest job I've ever had, by far, I got to see up close how so many students didn't have the opportunities that I had. And that wasn't fair. They had all the potential in the world, but so many of my students thought that math was boring, it was worksheets, it was memorization. They didn't see how it connected to their real lives. And so a lot of our work that we do on our team is focused on how can you make math more motivating, more engaging, and more relevant and connected to careers. And so as it relates to AI, actually, many of the things that John mentioned are similar to our focus. AI tutoring, we think, has a lot of potential. But particularly for teachers, there's so many ways that AI can save teachers time so they can focus on what they do best and give them feedback on their practice. I know we'll get into more details on that, and I'm happy to talk about our grantees and some of the work that we're supporting. But thanks for having me.
Great.
Right, I'm Daniel Lai from the Hong Kong Jockey Club Charities Trust. The Hong Kong Jockey Club is not a club for the jockey. It actually has been around in Hong Kong for 140 years. Its operations is through an integrated business model, horse racing, entertainment, a membership club, and also wagering and lottery. The trust, which is like a foundation, was set up in 1959. By now, it's donating something like an average of 5 billion Hong Kong dollar, which is around $400 million every year to various initiatives. Our focus is not just education, but our focus include poverty alleviation, talent and sector development, youth, elderly, health care, community, and sports, culture, and arts. We recently donated for the construction of a palace museum in Hong Kong. And recently we also formed an Institute of Philanthropy, which we will be leveraging to do more work outside of Hong Kong. For under our talent and sector development, we have a series of initiatives for equipping our next generation with 21st century skill. And Cool Think project was one of them, which has been quite successful, and it's been a pleasure working with the MIT team and Apps Inventor team for the last 8 years. Under this area, we are now looking at AI and its impact and how students should learn and use AI. So this is a project we are now framing out and discussing with MIT, the RAISE initiative. Hopefully we could frame up something that will benefit the students in Hong Kong.
Great, thank you. All right, my next question I'd like to invite Amber and Daniel to respond to. So what challenges do educational institutions face in implementing AI literacy programs or other programs you've been investing in? And how can funding help overcome these obstacles for teachers and students? So maybe Amber, start with you.
Sure. All right. Well, thanks for that question, and just really impressive, all the work that everyone's doing on the panel. So when I was thinking about this question, I ended up thinking that there were sort of 4 main challenges that were getting in the way of schools being able to leverage AI for all the promise that we've been talking about here for the past few days. And I would say the first is really lacking the infrastructure to use it effectively and equitably. And when I'm talking about infrastructure, I'm talking about people who know how to use it, who are comfortable with it, but also have the opportunities to play with it and experience it and understand it, which ended up resulting in over-reliance on outside expertise, which can sometimes be great, but can also create lots of vulnerabilities, especially since we don't actually know now how to determine what is good AI, I'm being like really reductive there, and what is not. We haven't gotten sophisticated enough to understand what we think is effective. And so the second piece is insufficient digital access. And that's in this country at least, there's a legacy of digital divide. In New York City, 25% of households still don't have access to high-speed internet access. If you don't have that, then AI isn't really even a possibility for you, and then not even talking about the costs of things like compute, or the fact that OpenAI and ChatGPT currently cost about $120 a year, which for a family that isn't able to have enough money to eat or house themselves is really prohibitive. And then lacking policies and practices. So in New York City, some of you might have read that when ChatGPT came out, the institutions had to immediately say, wait a minute, let's not use it for a minute until we can figure it out. That is not a good way to be setting up your infrastructure so that you can be using it effectively. Then I'll just quickly go through some of the others. Real fear of AI. So I'm an AI optimist. I think we're in a room of AI optimists, but teachers are really scared. People are really scared. And it's getting in the way of us being able to use it and learn collaboratively. I think maybe some of you heard of secret cyborgs, like we're driving people who are using AI under the ground. Lack of strong data systems for R&D. We don't have the data, and so it's difficult for us to use it and use AI to also figure out what it is we want to use with it. But we also lack infrastructure to have the community voice in part of the development of it, which is a real challenge. And then the fact that we're not integrating it into our current systems. AI, establishing a new vertical of learning that is AI is going to be very difficult. And so the converse of all of that are the things I think philanthropy can do. We can invest in that infrastructure. We can support inclusive AI R&D and really think about measurement and evaluation, which I think you'll hear more about from John.
Great, yes. And then Daniel.
We believe that AI is a very important subject, both at national level and education level. I think without adopting AI, I think one will not be advancing as your counterparts. But I personally believe AI is a two-edged sword. It may create an even wider gap in terms of digital divide. So that's why we believe we have to not quite teach, but let the younger generation experience and understand AI. So AI literacy and AI fluency is very important for in our education system. And we think that it should start young. So the program we're looking at children at the age of 10, 11, 12, where they have a bit of concept and understanding, so we could instill the concept, the practice, and perspective of AI into their curriculum and help them to be more AI literate, understand the ethical side, also the constraint, and what they can do, what they shouldn't be doing in terms of AI.
Great, thank you. All right, my next question, I'm going to invite John to respond to. How can we measure the impact of AI funding on educational outcomes to ensure accountability?
Yeah, so at Overdeck, we think a lot about building evidence and how we measure impact. And there's really 3 areas that I would want to highlight. Like, one is just investing in more research as this field emerges. Obviously, there's a lot of newness. It almost feels impossible to keep up with the amount of iteration and new developments that are occurring. But to the extent that we can be investing in research that helps us understand the efficacy of these new tools, it's quite important. And we at Overdeck just invested in 3 different studies that are looking at teacher coaching tools with the hopes that we'll be able to identify what works amongst those or how they can grow more cost effective. As well as thinking about for our grantees when we are doing grant reporting, how do we have measures that make sure that we're focused on outcomes that these new tools are achieving? So we're pairing a lot of excitement about activity and trying new things with actually understanding how they change business as usual. The second area I would hold up is having just elevating standards of evidence in the field. I look at ed tech broadly, I think a lot of folks do, and just think about how quickly the horse left the barn. And we got to a point where even now when we analyze ed tech implementation and adoption in the field, there's been recent studies that show that only 26% of ed tech tools have any standard of evidence according to the ESSA standards, which is how Department of Education measures the quality of evidence. So it's like a shockingly low number. Our hope is to really think about how we put standards of excellence into procurement processes from day one, how we think about benchmarks as a field. And this is quite an important area to understand how we can normalize and standardize the way that we are measuring the effectiveness of new AI models and interventions, and I mean effectiveness not just in terms of student outcomes and teacher outcomes, but also their fidelity towards ethical guidelines and data privacy standards. And the third area I would just lift is just greater learning as a field. Like, this is obviously like rapidly emergent. Having more spaces for shared language and lifting up insights across the field about what we're learning and what's working. We've started to see things like investing in new coverage by EdWeek that will profile AI tools and new studies coming out on AI tools, just to like lift this up more publicly, and the extent to which we can just create more transparency about what is occurring and just learn from each other and just pulling up exemplars. I think that will just help us all grow as a field.
Great, thank you. My next question is for Bo. So at this conference, we've heard lots of talks and seen lots of demos where AI can enable new creative learning experiences for learners. My question is, where do you see new opportunities that AI might enable and bring about more constructionist or project-based learning into classrooms?
That's a great question. I'll start by answering that it can mean many different things for many different people, and sometimes we don't clearly express our values and intentions when we create AI and tools. So we clearly make transparent that our approach and values are about creativity and learning and fun and obviously quality and so forth. But I think it's important for everyone who develop applications that transparent about where you come from, what values you put into applications. So when people can see that, can disagree or not, but at least we have a common ground for what we put into that. So for our work, it's very important that process of creativity is a personalization journey that enables children to create their own ideas, their own identity. So we're not personalizing education by testing children, using AI to test children and put them on a path that is kind of an improvement agenda, an efficiency agenda, but instead equip them to create their own tools to be able to express their ideas, to be able to work with the community. So we see some aspects around that coming up. One of the applications that also are both student and teacher driven right now is an application called playlab.ai. One of the members of the Scratch team at the MIT developed application that enables educators to create their own kind of applications for AI. So any kind of platforms that enable students and educators to create their own ideas and AI applications, I think, would be very important. So in our work, there's a lot of play and gamification that makes learning more fun and interesting and interactive. What we hope to move towards is more the constructionist point of view, where you actually enable teams to create projects, to find ideas for projects, to help them create good prompts for inquiry and questions they can ask. So I see a little bit of examples around this, but I'm also a little concerned about children spending too much time on screens to be put on an AI train of being assessed and deficit model of education. So the ones that integrates much more the hands-on resources they have around them.
Great. All right, for my next question, I'm going to invite Louis to respond. What role does AI play in personalized learning in the kinds of works that you've been funding? And what do you see as the potential benefits and drawbacks?
Sure, and I'll pick up on a few of the themes. Playlab's a really cool platform as well, if you haven't checked it out. MIT alum, I think, that has led the creation of it. We're focused on 4 particular use cases when it comes to AI, and I'll just say first, before I even get into those, I've really appreciated the focus on underserved students and sort of diversity and equity generally that I've heard throughout this conference. I think that's so important. That's entirely our focus as well, students that need more opportunities. And I think there's a ton of room for AI to play a role in that. We're heavily focused on AI tutoring for students. On the teacher side, we talked about teacher coaching already. When I was a teacher, I got no feedback, almost no feedback. And so there's some really cool research and tools that, for example, can take an audio stream of the math dialogue happening in a classroom and give the teacher feedback on what's happening. Did the teacher spend all the time talking, or were the students spending enough time talking? You want more of the latter. Was the teacher asking open-ended questions, or were they asking closed-ended questions? And that's something that speech rec and natural language processing is getting quite good at, except that the models often don't include data from underserved students. And so if you're an English language learner, that speech rec's not going to work as well for you, and it's not going to give as useful feedback to the teachers. And so that's a role that I think we all can play, is, for example, supporting the data set generation and collection of data that does include underserved students to be used in training the models. Just to jump back to the AI tutoring example, I think it's a really interesting use case that's obviously completely relevant to personalized learning, since students can interact with an AI tutor in a pace and way that makes sense for them. But here's the thing, we don't actually know if they work yet or not. It's early days in some ways, though the ed tech field has been trying to make intelligent tutoring systems for decades with lots of interesting products, but if you just look at the top line outcomes, they haven't really moved. The needle has not moved. And so I am optimistic as well. Some days I'm optimistic, some days I'm a little skeptical, because I'm like, what's going to be different about this wave of AI innovations? And I hope that through all the work that people in this room are doing, that we really can move the needle on outcomes this time. To take the tutoring example, so here's the good news about tutoring. We know that human tutoring works. It's got the strongest research base on interventions of almost anything. And so the goal would not necessarily be just to replace human tutors, though human tutors are expensive and not accessible to a lot of the students we're focused on. And so how can an AI tutor do some of the things that a human tutor does? And there's a lot of R&D to be done on that front. So right now, if you go into ChatGPT and you ask it for help with your math homework, and I give it the sort of fractions problem I'm working on, what's ChatGPT going to do? It's going to give you the answer. And maybe it'll give you the steps to the answer, and it'll give you a nice set of steps, but it's going to give the answer. And what's a human tutor going to do? A human tutor is not going to give you the answer. They're going to ask you questions. They're going to nudge. They're going to know when to be quiet. They're going to know you well enough and have a relationship with you to know how to connect that fractions problem to baseball, because they know you're super interested in baseball. And so I think the question becomes, how can AI tutors start to mimic some of those tutoring moves that a human tutor makes? And that's something where I think there's just a ton of need for the people in this room and the role of philanthropy to continue to conduct research on, and to the points that John made, see if any of it actually works. There's really interesting projects happening here at MIT to collect large-scale data sets of tutoring moves from real human tutors to use in training the models. And so I think it's early days, and it's all of our job to keep an eye on supporting organizations that are actually doing research to see what works, and for whom, and under what conditions it works as well.
And Daniel, you wanted?
Could I make one
Yes.
point responding to especially the diversity management for students? We have another project that the Jockey Club has funded, not quite the coding one, but using data to address the diversity of students. We did not work on tutoring, but we work on building AI models that actually predict students' outcome. We now have successfully, through our collaboration with the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, built modules that actually predict students' academic performance using the past performance. In Hong Kong, we also have the university entrance examination that we call DSE, Secondary School Diploma Examination, where you have to get a good results in English language, Chinese language, and mathematics, plus one other subject. So we use this module, this AI module, to predict how a student can perform in this examination. And so that it gives early warning to the teachers to actually help the student through specific intervention to improve their subjects. So it's actually working. We actually have 7 or 8 schools using this for the students in this year examination, and it's proof that it actually provides the alerts. We also use similar technique to pick out the talented students using a multidisciplinary intelligence theory. I think this was Dr. Gardner's publication, where we use a number of attributes and predict certain individual talents so that we could pick out the right students for developments.
Great, thank you. So I want to double click on the supporting greater diversity inclusivity. I can tell this is a passion point for our panel. So I invite everyone to respond to this, but I'll maybe start with you, Amber. So the question is, how can funding and perhaps policy initiatives support greater diversity and inclusivity in AI research and development? So if we begin with you, Amber.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but we're really thinking about how we can bring the voices of people with lived experience, people who, underrepresented minorities, people who might not be at those tables now, and bring them to the table. And that's not just setting another seat, if we sort of torture this analogy of a table. It's actually making it so that when the person comes to the seat, they have the ability and knowledge to participate in those conversations, but also that the table is open to listening and hearing. That's not so easy. So it's both capacity building, which we've been talking about, but it's also culture shift, right? And learning how we listen that we haven't been so good at. So we've been thinking a lot about that. New York is doing some interesting work. I think maybe there are a few different hubs, AI hubs around the country. One of them is called Empire AI. It just launched in New York. It's a collaboration of 7 different institutions of higher ed and government. And part of what we're trying to do is seeing how we can bring more diverse voices into that. We also, my colleague is here, Eugene, from a part of Robin Hood Blue Ridge Labs that has a design insight group that I think has 2,500 right now, people with lived experience in New York City who collaborate with innovators, tech innovators, to make sure that when they're doing their user design, that they're bringing those voices and perspectives into the way in which they're developing these programs. And I would say the second thing is some accountability measures for the companies that are right now building this AI. There's a very small group of companies that are really dictating how this technology is evolving, and we need to have policies in place that can make sure that equity is at the forefront, that we're thinking about how to mitigate bias, and also accessibility, so that we can make sure that it doesn't create or exacerbate inequities, as one of the other panelists was mentioning, and increase or create a new divide on top of the divides that we're already trying to overcome. Thanks.
I'll make it short. I think the most important thing about AI and diversity is that you help communities create their own data sets and their own platforms. And it's a little bit based on some of the examples that is shared. If we begin to work with prediction mechanisms for students, we sometimes end up predicting and putting them on a path that they might not want to be on or could have potential to do otherwise. So it's really important to go in with the mindset that a child can develop and learn despite the path that might have been predicted to be on. And that relies on you being not on the screen, but being out in the community, work with materials and people, and then using AI to ask better questions, to find other information, to be critical thinkers around that. So I work much more with community-based platforms and support educators and communities to develop their own AI models. I think that would be really important.
I'll add just 2 quick thoughts here. One is in terms of inclusivity. I think it was Adolfo's research earlier just talking about how important it is to engage teachers and their mindsets in this process. So I think just like really being very conscious about how it's working for teachers as really the gateway for better usage in the classroom and understanding their needs in order to ensure that AI is having an impact for students in a diversity of classroom settings. The second I would say is from a research standpoint is when we invest in studies, we're not just looking broadly what the effect size is kind of like for the mean, but we're really understanding for different sets of students how effective these tools are, so we understand what's working but also for who.
Yeah, I'll add it quick too. And John, I don't know if you'd agree. It's shocking how often that doesn't happen in terms of ability to disaggregate data coming out of studies. So it seems like a simple thing that's definitely not happening enough. The 2 things I'll add, definitely the co-design spirit that Amber mentioned, we've heard in presentations today, is super important. The way we tackle that from a grant-making perspective is by trying to bring groups together that don't naturally have the opportunities to work together. So really often, there's researchers doing really interesting work and obviously care about wanting to make an impact on student outcomes. There's school districts and teachers and students who are working really hard. And there's product companies and product organizations that are building really interesting products. Each of those 3 groups, they do not work together often enough. They often speak different languages, and the incentives sort of in their systems and how they work often don't lead to them working together. So from a grant-making perspective, that's one thing that we focus on tremendously, and then we can make sure that we're including school districts and schools that serve large percentages of underserved students in the equation at the table, helping play a role in what's getting built, what's getting researched.
Universities often work pretty much on their own. One function that we, as a foundation, that we've tried to do is to facilitate the collaboration, bringing in those that have specific knowledge and skill to do certain research. Funding is one side, but having the vision and insights in bringing in the right partner is very important. That's exactly how we did Cool Thing, bringing in the best of the partners together to make this work.
Great, thank you. All right, I now want to open up questions to the audience. So maybe if we can take a couple of these mics. Anyone? Oh, here we go. Sorry. Anyone in the audience have a question? Yes.
It is an amazing discussion. My question would be how the personalized learning for students will impact using the AI towards the biology, biomedicine, things like that. Those students have the high capability of coding everything, but the challenging is how he can fit in the biology to solve the problems. So that is what my thinking. Thank you very much.
So to paraphrase, integrating the biology and the AI into student learning. Okay, any thoughts? So multidisciplinary biology and AI, any thoughts on the panel?
Yes, I think from our perspective, we are working in healthcare, working in hospitals, and embedding technology and play and so forth. I think our point is that individuals need to be empowered to understand what data is about themselves, what is being collected, and take responsibility of that. So from healthcare, you have like a journal about your well-being, the data is collected, and so forth. And I think education can actually learn a lot from that students actually have their own portfolio. They create their own ideas. They are proud of what they have achieved, and they have choices and figure out how to represent it about themselves and others. So I think it's not necessarily about biology, but it's more about the choices that individuals have in terms of being able to understand the information and the data and how they have on their own blockchain or digital platform, how it's represented so they become proud and take responsibility of it. So that's mostly what our work is to make sure that that's kind of a principle all the way, whether it's in healthcare or hospitals or treatments in that work. So we begin to do that a little bit now also on what's called play prescriptions, where we begin to observe what children do and manipulate with particular materials, and then based on that understand how to support, whether it's a clinician or a parent. But again, it's really, being transparent around what are the things that are important for these type of manipulation, what data is collected, and what are the choices to select other kind of games and approaches. So I think that's our approach to it.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm curious kind of about the potential for like over-quantification in using AI, especially with students and in classrooms. We heard about using transcription tools to kind of look at who's talking in classrooms, teachers, student, and where that balance is, or looking at student performance and in preempting test results. I'm just curious kind of how you all think about that, not only from like an investment perspective, but just from like a tool development perspective. I think there's a lot of pluses and minuses, and I'm curious kind of where the minuses are being weighed and if there's any type of standardization happening in those considerations.
Thank you for that question. It's I think it's the question on most of our minds too. It came up, I think, Bo, you were talking about this risk of tracking kids, which has always been a challenge with technology, that it's going to predetermine what your road is based on what your origin story was. I think part of the way that we've been seeking to mitigate that is by, well, first off, we're not investing right now in tools that are going directly to students, other than opportunities for them to think about what it is that they might want to construct or how they want to interact. So that's one piece. And we're really leaning heavily into the human AI entanglement. If any of you have read George Siemens, give credit for that terminology. But this idea that how can we supercharge the best in teachers and in the systems so that when they come, so I think it was the example, Louis, were you the example of being able to use baseball for a student who is, right? So most tutors, as much as they want to personalize for students, they're limited by, right, what it is. We can't know everything about everything. But imagine a tutor that can now say, well, you're interested in this thing. It might seem a little esoteric to me, but with the aid of AI, I can make sure that I'm personalizing that to your specific interests, that we might be able to overcome some of the challenges with engagement. So I think that's, and then all the research that I think we're all talking about right now is trying to figure out where the challenges are. I don't think we know all of them. You're naming one of the important ones, but so I think we're trying to move quickly and slowly at the same time.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, it's a great question, and definitely, immediate issues of privacy and security as it relates to student data come into play. I'll say I don't know that the problem is that there's not enough data. So I agree that we have to be, is the goal just to collect more and more data and instrument more and more? I don't know. But I do think there's a couple issues. One is that data is often living in many, many different silos, and it is often not used to present to teachers and students actually useful ways about things that they can actually do based on that data. And so those are the two bigger problems that I think I would focus on rather than just the pure quantity of data. Teachers are very often using many different products and tools that are collecting data in their classroom, and often that data just lives in completely different silos, and therefore tools that are trying to present recommendations to teachers, for example, don't have a holistic view of what's happening. And then the other thing I'll say is, are we collecting the right data? So there's plenty of data focused on sort of student progress on academic skills, super important. A lot of that's getting really fine-grained. We've seen some presentations on that here. But what about student perceptions in math? So a lot of the kids that I taught, I mentioned, they came to me hating math. And it wasn't that they weren't capable, it was that they weren't confident in their own skills, they weren't engaged in it, they weren't motivated in it. And those perceptions, which often start as young as 3rd grade, research shows often hit girls more than boys. That's something that we don't often know enough about. And so how often are we asking students, hey, are you enjoying math? And what are sort of some valid measurement ways to go about that? I think is a bit of an open field when it comes to measurement and data.
Yeah, I'll very much pick up on that, and I appreciate the spirit of the question. I am excited about how AI could be transformative for the way that we do assessment, and with an eye towards thinking about more formative assessment, well, kind of not just high-stakes testing, and really thinking about the way that it could help us better understand non-cognitive skills and competencies. And that's just not through collecting more data, but just understanding and kind of processing data that we have. But I think zooming out, bigger picture, like I do think we could very easily fall into a trap of like focusing on the battle and losing the greater war here. There's like a study that came out, I don't want to totally misrepresent the exact findings of it, but it was a study that came out over the last, I think just about a week ago with a group of students in Turkey that looked at AI implementation and how it affected cohorts of students that were using AI or not, and they found that students that leveraged AI did better on some of the measures, but then when they gave all students, again, like the set of tests, they found that the students that previously had access to AI did worse in a follow-on test, essentially showing that like it might be something that like erodes from critical thinking by just relying on the tool. So I think there's like bigger questions that we need to ask and consider about like what does success actually look like here? What are the skills that we're trying to prime for and the abilities that we're trying to prime for? And really think about that as a way of guiding our approach to AI.
That was such an exciting question. And maybe it's because we're all interested in data and so forth. So I'll just build on what's just been said. For us, as a fundamental thing that's always important is, are students enjoying learning? So no matter how much data you collect or how you quantify things, there are a few questions that are always important to ask at the individual level. So make sure we don't lose sight of that one. The second one is collecting more and diverse sets of data. We would always argue for that. I saw Pharrell Williams commenting on the Olympic Games in Paris this morning, where he said, like, why is music and arts and so forth no longer part of the Olympic Games? I feel a little bit like it's education right now. We're only collecting data on a few things that we are competing against. We're not actually broadening the whole data sets on a variety of other parameters that could be relevant. So let's get more emotional and social, other kind of factors that we can navigate. And then the final one, I think is the most important for us at least, is you always have choice and transparency on what data is collected about you. And that we get used to navigating these data sets and use AI to, visualize and understand and be critical towards them. I think that would be an important competence and also exciting for many to figure that out, how we can handle all that data. But a few key points there.
Terrific. All right, another question.
I could just also add that, yes, the more data, I think with AI model, it will be more accurate with deep learning. But asking teachers to provide more data doesn't work. The teachers are reluctant to help to collect data. So we are trying to use whatever data is available at school, and they are all scattered everywhere. And some of the tools actually can help to integrate the data, and AI tools can help to very effectively and efficiently filter out only the relevant data and do analysis using those data.
Any other questions? Oh, we have one here.
Thank you. My name is Barnes. I guess I'll just throw this question out to all of you. It was touched upon by you, John. The idea of what is your perception of the current landscape and the future of these maybe AI-driven assessment models that are non-cognitive, that are just starting to appear out there in our world. Do you think that they are? Well, first of all, what do you think about it? What's your impression of what's out there today, and where that could head in the near future to basically make this a more valid way of assessing whether or not students actually perceive that they like what they're doing and that they're interested, engaged, and want to continue doing it, especially in fundamental AI skills?
Look, we have PISA, who's already committed to adopting AI into its assessment tool, I think starting in 2029. I think there's a lot of edtech platforms and that are now experimenting with ways of integrating AI to do more formative assessment. I think it's going to be very kind of frothy market over the next few years because there's been a lot of built-up energy about transformation to assessment that hasn't played out. I feel like whereas this conversation has been active for like 2 or 3 decades at this point. I don't actually know if it's a technology question versus a definitional question about like what we mean by certain competencies and characteristics and alignment. I think this is a field where part of the struggle has been about even having common taxonomies and definitions around some of those SEL attributes and characteristics. So I do think it might be just about like what gets measured gets managed a bit, where we're seeking to understand how can we have more commonality to understanding what actually drives success, and that's not just academic success, that's life success, and that's life satisfaction and outcomes that really ultimately roll up into well-being, not just academic performance. So I don't really, if I'm honest with you, have like a personal read in terms of optimism about or feeling about specific assessments at this point, but just see a lot of market activity that's aligned with driving more of this as we move in the coming years.
Also, a very interesting question. I think I work with the OECD, a recent test there on the creativity and critical thinking, and I know they're moving towards socio-technical systems testing based on constructionism and so forth in 2025. I definitely see that much more of testing goes towards real-life projects. So you actually get a challenge, you are trying to solve a problem, but it takes a massive amount of work to create these types of assessments. But I feel they're much more authentic. They are, what is kind of a project that you are creating your own kind of t-shirt or cocktail or solving a problem in your neighborhood? Because then we are actually able to work with a lot of the other types of measures embedded in that. The second thing is, I think AI allows us to collect data throughout the day if you and your mobile are able to do much more self-assessments. So some of the platforms we have supported also mostly on well-being is actually on your mobile, where individuals are able to collect a few things around well-being and engagement. And I think that will be more and more interesting because learning happens throughout the day and it can be influenced by so many different factors. So that ability to have your own kind of data set and collecting that data and touching the emotional into your everyday life, I think will be important. And then I think there's a new work around peer-based assessments that will be really interesting. So how do we actually assess each other's work and each other's interests and so forth and support each other? And again, that's why I see, particularly for a classroom, that would be interesting if you take that classroom set, not to share with others, but begin to support peers among that, would be interesting for AI also. So that's a few things that we find interesting.
I will say that part of your question was what's happening in the market right now and where we think it's going. what I'm seeing in the market right now is that most of the AI applications that are being adopted are efficiency plays, like operational, or they're about really entrenching current paradigms. And so I think that for all the wonderful things that we've talked about here, there's some work that needs to be done so that AI can actually yield its promise of transformation. And we're not quite there yet. I think a lot of what we've been seeing here are on the cusp of pushing that forward. But we need to think about how we are going to influence the market to behave differently if we want any of these things to be picked up. So it's just, I don't know how to do that, but that's something we've been thinking about a lot.
Would anyone else like to respond? Yeah. Daniel? No, you're good. We're good? All right, we have time for one more question.
First of all, thank you so much, everyone, and for your time. My name is Ronak, federal government officer working on AI interventions and makerspaces across the country. This is a burning question that we have at the federal government itself, and I was just having a conversation before this. What does success mean for us in a resource-constrained environment? Is one of the mission directors who asked me this question, to relay this question to all of the panel right now. What do you think success is? What are the metrics? How can we extract information, data to determine whether a particular program is successful or not? Is a question. So it's a very how question, especially for someone like me from a resource-constrained country. Thank you so much.
Any takers?
Can we get a clarification on the question?
Oh, we want a clarification on the question, Ronak?
What does success mean?
What does success mean in a resource-constrained environment?
In a resource-constrained environment.
So there's been a very important movement in philanthropy in our work over the past 10 years, which I was trying to hint in the beginning. So I think we've had, coming from a mindset that success is based on what is quantifiable accountability mechanisms of achieving certain outcomes, like in education and so forth. We are now moving towards more social, emotional, more broader issues of outcomes, and where success absolutely is always about the joy of learning and the individual student. But I think the movement right now is that success is actually defined by the community. So it's much more a listening activity right now, finding the right ones that actually knows about the community, can bring together the ecosystem, and then address the questions that are at that level. And that makes our work a little more difficult because we actually don't have access to that knowledge. So there's so much access and knowledge in the communities, but we need to help facilitate the conversations around, at which level of speed of change would one wants to be familiar with and happy with and so forth. So right now we are more facilitating conversations at the community level around barriers and needs and so forth, and then we can bring in our partners at different levels.
Great. So would you like to respond? Yes?
I'm going to give a big, medium, and little answer because it depends for me on where, what sort of layer of the stack we're asking in. Big picture, in our work, we want to see more kids have more opportunities in life. And we measure that, in our case, because we're so focused on math, by how many students are doing well in math at that 8th or 9th grade moment, in part because of that moment's predictive power. So that's kind of the high level answer of a type of metric that we're looking at to see, hey, for the relatively small amount of money that we're able to give out, when I say relative, I mean relative to how big the problem is, we can take a look at, hey, is the needle moving on math outcomes? But then if you go to the next layer down in the stack, my team supports a lot of research and development work in ed tech. What we want to see is more math products that are motivating and engaging the students. And so there's a bunch of different ways of measuring that, but at the portfolio level, we want to see those products exist, getting used, and actually see research studies that are showing improvements in math motivation and engagement starting much earlier than 8th or 9th grade. And so that'd be at the portfolio level. And then maybe down at the individual grant level, we've talked a bunch about AI tutoring, and John referenced the idea of benchmarks. And so benchmarks in the large language model space are the thing that models are competing against to see what their performance is like. Boy, it'd be nice if there was a benchmark for AI tutoring so that you could take a look at the different models and the different products being built on top of those models and see how well they actually perform against a benchmark that's thoughtfully designed based on all the research around what goes into good tutoring. So that would be sort of the small answer, where a particular grant to develop a benchmark, which is something that we're working on, could actually show measurably that tutoring products and models underneath them are actually performing well. So I think that's the sort of at least high-level framework where you think about sort of ultimate life outcomes down through sort of grant-specific performance. And I don't know if that totally gets to your question, but...
Well, we're actually getting overtime. Maybe let's have Amber. Sure. Do you want to contribute? And then
yes. So we're looking to make sure that every student has access to grade level, engaging, affirming, and rigorous education, with the goal that they will ultimately have economic mobility, especially for under-resourced communities. So we're measuring it specifically, our lifetime earnings outcomes increasing for people who go through education. That's our long-term metric of success. I'm going to put on my hat from my time at UNICEF and the World Bank, where we were thinking about, we support under-resourced communities within the United States, but different contexts than when I was supporting communities in the Global South. And for there, it was about if we could shift the paradigm from a needs-based approach, where success was access to basic things just like water and safety, which are important, to a rights-based approach, where every student would be able to have access to play, but also to learning opportunities that they could then increase their agency, as well as safety and healthcare. And I think that was the ultimate objective, and how we measured that was, it was really messy. Probably just goes right back to the Sustainable Development Goals and measuring progress against those.
And if I misunderstood your question, come grab me after. I'd love to keep chatting about it.
I'd just like to give one very simple, and we should get back to basic. I think in terms of the success, this is about learning and teaching. We should look at the outcome, whether the students, they improve academically, and whether they are happy, whether the teachers got much more frustrated or the students get more happy. So we should look at the basic outcome.
Great, thank you so much. So we are beyond time. It was great. We had so many questions. I want to thank this panel for your perspectives and your insights and your support, and for helping us surface some really important new directions and questions for our community. Thank you so much.